Hello and welcome to the Westchester Education Services K-12 Education Legislation and Funding Update. My name is Nicole Tomasi and I'm the Marketing and Conference Manager here for Westchester Education Services. I'm really glad that you could all join us today, and we have a very information-packed hour. So as everybody's finishing getting signed in, I just want to run through a few general items regarding this session. Namely that your microphones are going to be muted during the session. And if you have any questions during any time at any point in the discussion, you can enter those in the lower portion of the screen where there's the Q&A box that's accessible from your control bar. We did receive quite a few questions beforehand, so while we will try to get to as many questions as possible, we may not be able to get to all of them during the time that we have, so we will answer them offline after the webinar. For those of you who may not be familiar with Westchester Education Services, we are a company that offers product development services, art and design, and production, whether as a full service package or a la carte, depending on your particular needs. And the way we operate is that we customize processes to fit your needs and to your expectations on every project that we do with you. And this is what makes Westchester Education Services a trusted partner for education and edtech companies. Westchester Education Services is US-based and headquartered in Dayton, Ohio, and we have additional resources based throughout the United States, Europe, and India. And we operate as a division of the employee-owned Westchester Publishing Services that's in Danbury, Connecticut. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to the host for today's webinar, Kevin J. Gray, who is the President and Chief Content Officer for Westchester Education Services. Kevin?
Hello all, thank you, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. As Nicole mentioned, I'm the President and Chief Content Officer at Westchester. And as she said, we're a product development company working with ed techs and ed pubs really throughout the world, helping build content, art design, production, and both digital and print production. Part of our mission is to have an understanding of what's happening in the education space and then sharing that information with clients and others in the space. And we do so through blogs and podcasts and webinars like this one. So before, when folks were logging in, Nicole had posted a poll, and I wanted to touch on that quickly. So Nicole, if you would pull up the next slide. And so we'd ask, what sort of things are folks concerned about? Adapting products, getting resources, figuring out how to sell in international markets, and how allocations would affect purchasing plans. So next slide, please, Nicole. Not surprisingly, particularly given the topic of this conversation, funding allocations were at the top of that, with more than 60% of respondents looking for that. So with that in mind, I am very pleased to introduce Jay Diskey of Diskey Public Affairs out of Washington, D.C. And he's our returning guest here on the webinar. Jay is an education policy consultant. He's our educational policy consultant. He's got about 30, actually a little more than 30 years of experience working in the K-12 education policy space, both at the federal and state level. And we're going to have a conversation here with Jay to talk through kind of what he's seeing at a funding level and then also at a policy level. So Jay, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks again for being here.
Oh, well, thank you, Kevin, for inviting me. I think this is maybe our fourth webinar over the past 1.5 to 2 years. So thank you for inviting me back. Well, as the title of this is largely funding, and so let's dig right in. This presentation will largely be divvied up into 4 broad categories: the K-12 funding outlook, more specifically. Then we go to state and federal policy and legislative trends, which are obviously tied to the funding levels. We'll talk about impacts on education companies, talk a little bit about international toward the tail end of this as well. And then obviously summarize and take a lot of questions. I think, as Nicole mentioned, we've really received a great amount, a large number of very great questions, and we'll try to get to those, as many as we can. So let's dig in. Next slide. Goodness, in terms of federal funding, something that's top of the mind for many of you is, when does the so-called pandemic ESSER relief funding run out? September 30th, 2024. Many of you know that. For those who aren't aware of the pandemic funding, the United States Congress made an unprecedented amount of money available and during the pandemic in 3 major tranches of funds. It totals $190 billion, the largest historic or the largest and historic investment in K-12 education in our nation's history. All of these monies must be used in about 13 months, September 30th, 2024. All funds must be obligated by then and then drawn down quite quickly. I've been asked repeatedly by clients and some others in the K-12 space, well, will there be an extension if funds aren't used? The answer is no. And that is what Congress has been saying. I made a number of rounds on Capitol Hill right before recess ended in July, taking several clients around. And let me tell you, there's no appetite in the United States Congress for extending these funds. In fact, there's some hostility to the fact that some of these funds are around, but they won't be clawed back. 80 billion remains available, which is roughly, I think, about 43% of the funds. So there's a lot to be drawn down, which means there's a lot of federal money to spend. I do want to mention one exception to an extension. I don't think it probably applies to any of you, but if it's a large capital project, like a heating or a ventilation system, a new HVAC system in a school, if there's labor issues or supply chain issues, then the Department of Education says there will be an extension. But don't think that if you're a provider of software, instructional materials, ed tech items, et cetera, professional development, I can't imagine there'll be any extensions at all. Now let's go to what's called the annual federal allocations. In recent years, and I say annual federal allocations, these are the titles that a number of you receive funds vis-a-vis through school districts for your products. There's Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV. These all are titles within the broad Every Student Succeeds Act, which Congress appropriated back in 2015. In recent years, these allocations have really shot up in dramatic fashion. Title I has increased about 20% over the past 3 to 4 years, and many of the other titles have as well, such as Title III, support for English language learners. These are very large allocations. When I worked at the Department of Education in the early 1990s, it was great to see a 1 or 2% increase. Now we've seen most of these improve by well over 5% each year. Well, guess what? These are going to settle back down to the 0 to 1% to 2% level in the coming fiscal year, 2024, and the one following that, due to what's called the new budget caps, which were put into place in May when there was a large, very public disagreement between House Republicans that wanted to cut existing budgets and the White House. And they agreed to certain cuts. The cuts really take the form of level funding, slight decreases for the next 2 years. But again, the good news is, at least through next September, there's plenty of ESSER funds available. Next slide. Yes.
Before we go into that, what do you see as the timetable for Congress approving the 2024 budget?
Yeah, good question. What it is supposed to be, the budget, the 2024 fiscal year budget is supposed to start on October 1, 2023. So in a little more than 30 days. The federal fiscal year runs from October 1 through September 30th. However, Congress, unfortunately, but not surprisingly, is nowhere close to approving this budget. So what we're going to see is a number of continuing resolutions. It would not surprise me if this budget isn't approved until around the Christmas, New Year's recess. That's when it was approved last year. Unfortunately, Congress has gotten into this habit. But that's the way it is. Until that time, the current budget levels remain in effect. So schools will continue to get the current budget levels. Moving on to state budgets. State budgets are good this year for the most part. Over the past 2 years, they've been fantastic due to influx of federal monies and also due to improving economic conditions in nearly all of the states. Now, increases are settling back down into what have been historical norms, but still, it's pretty good this year. Florida, K-12 budget's up 8.9%. Pennsylvania's up 7.8%. But last year it was nearly 11%. So you can see things settling down. Michigan, 5% this year. Last year, 14.3%. So again, there's kind of a settling down. Illinois, 4.4%. Texas, just 1.2%. And then California was one of the few states that started the new 2024 fiscal year with a decrease. But the big but is California had positive blowout K-12 budgets the past 2 years, really 3 years. And one thing that's not on this slide, there are still very large block grants that were approved in previous budgets, K-12 block grants. One is a $3.4 billion block grant for instructional materials, for content, curriculum, digital materials, print materials. It's the largest block grant ever for instructional materials. There's also a very large block grant for learning recovery. Both these block grants, the funds extend into 2027, but that's a $5.9 billion block grant for learning recovery. So California, we look at this 2% and go, oh no, well, there's still a lot of money in California. Next slide. I wanted to get into some of the state policy and legislative trends. Some of these I've mentioned, I'm going to have individual slides on. One is science of reading, which is probably one of the, or certainly one of the, if not the major trend, legislative trend that we've seen over the past several years. I'll get into that in just a moment in the next slide. Learning recovery, which I mentioned. Nearly all of the states have passed learning recovery programs to recover the learning loss from the pandemic. Some of the larger programs are, as I mentioned, California, but also very large programs in Tennessee, for example, Michigan, goodness, it goes on and on, Minnesota, Pennsylvania. Another trend, which is a concerning trend, are what I call the culture wars legislation. I'll get into that in a separate slide in just a moment. Another trend, without a doubt, that is happening in about 20 of the states, school choice expansion. There were major expansions of school choice initiatives in a number of states, including Florida, Iowa, Utah, Arkansas, Oklahoma, several others. Some of these are for universal school choice, meaning a student of any income level, any income family level, whatever, sorry, tripping over words, can receive a voucher or has a potential to receive a voucher. So it is a major expansion of privatization of public education. I mentioned early learning, which is tied into science of reading, but there's many other early learning initiatives going on with transitional kindergarten, such as in California, kindergarten assessments of different types, new data collection, etc. The last thing I'll mention is really interesting, and it's more or less science of math. We've talked about science of reading. We're going to talk more about it on the next slide. But in the past 2 years, 7 states have approved major initiatives for science of math. It resembles science of reading in that these programs look to have a base of evidence. They have screening for numeracy competence, various other type of assessments, interventions, evidence-informed teaching practices, etc. in terms of the states that I mentioned, the 7, Alabama, Arkansas, Colorado, Florida, Louisiana, Virginia, West Virginia, have all passed so-called math reform. In some cases, they're specifically calling it science of math.
Jay, that one's been bubbling up, right? The science of reading's been we've been hearing it, started sort of 5 to 7 years ago and started getting really traction. Do you expect to see that we're on that same trend with science of math? We're a couple of years in, 5 years from now, do you expect that to be boiling over too?
We seem to be. I think that may be the case. I think it frankly depends on how much monies remain available. And we just talked about the funding. There won't be as much funding going forward. There's still a lot now. And it's not to say yet that everything's going to suddenly dry up next year or the following year after that. But indeed, I think there is a trend toward taking a look at science and really, in both cases, a focus on early learning, kindergarten through 3, trying to get students to certain grade levels by grade 3 or 4. The one thing that I think is one of the major things I think is different in terms of the trend, science of reading had an enormous amount of inertia behind it. Starting in the 1990s, Congress held its first hearing on more or less the science of hearing in July 1998. Then there was the National Reading Panel, which talked about science of reading. And that came out in 2001, 2008. I don't think that the math community, K-12 math community, has that sort of inertia behind it. It has a lot, but I don't know if it has the oomph that was behind science of reading and structured literacy. We'll see. Frankly, I hope so. So I hope that helps.
We'll put a check in on that for the next policy update just to see how it's going and see how your predictions were.
Yeah, very good. Next slide. Let's go back to the science of reading very briefly. Basically, close to 40 states. I think it may be 40. My tracking is a little bit different than Ed Weeks. I think theirs is in around 35 or 37. Now, when I make the claim that 40 states have provisions for science of reading, I mean just that, provisions. It may be very small provisions, nothing more than, let's have a study of this over the next year, or it may be a full-blown program, new initiative. But the good news is there are many new initiatives. Georgia this year enacted a new initiative, House Bill 538. This is an $80 million statewide science of reading initiative with a big chunk in it for instructional materials, for science of reading programs, instructional materials, screeners, etc. New Mexico, likewise, they're setting aside, I think it's 21 million just for a new reading materials fund, separate and apart from the annual allocation for instructional materials. In New Mexico, had already previously established a science of reading list, and I think they're looking for new entrants to get on the list. So there's an opportunity there. Virginia, new program. Ohio, HB 33, big program. This totals 129 million for science of reading. In Ohio, 60 million, a little more than half of that is going simply for curriculum, instructional materials, screening assessments, etc. So Ohio, a very large opportunity there. The Ohio Department of Education has been instructed by legislators to do an adoption, the first ever formal adoption by the Ohio State Department of Education. There will be a list. So those publishers and technology companies on the line that may have programs for this, stay tuned and pay attention to Ohio. There's a lot going on right now to simply set up that adoption process. Indiana, likewise, new program. The numbers, I'm frankly, a little fuzzy on because every number I get combines 2 different years, but it's clearly more than 20 to 30 million a year. Wisconsin, brand new program as well, statewide. Illinois, Illinois is doing something a little bit different, not necessarily creating a brand new statewide initiative, but it is establishing a rubric that it would like all school districts to use, which means school districts will likely be buying new programs. Oregon enacted a large program, so did Michigan. All of these, again, all of this unfolded this year, and there's a few others that I didn't quite fit on the slide. So it was really a big year for science and reading.
And lots of space in there for curriculum and instructional materials, it sounds like.
Yeah, there is, Kevin. At least half. In fact, I know that when the number was still around 34, 35 at the start of the year, 22 of those had specific provisions for curriculum. So I think now we're past 25, probably 27. Easily half of them, maybe as many as 2/3, have provision. So the golden age to do reading programs. We haven't seen anything like this in many years, if ever.
Yeah, haven't been many state adoptions, and I know literacy and ELA isn't really on the adoption list on a lot. And I think we'll get to that a little bit later, but
Yeah.
But it sounds like, outside that adoption cycle, or in states that have never had adoptions before, like my home state, Ohio, lots and lots of opportunity there for literacy curriculum providers.
That's right. Goodness, another trend that I mentioned, which is more of a concerning trend, these fit into kind of the cultural wars bucket. A couple different types of legislation that sometimes are parts of the same bills. One is opposition to critical race theory, also any divisive concepts, which is kind of this poorly defined, broad allegation that some legislators are making about various types of educational practices. There's also legislation that seeks to eliminate LGBTQ gender identity, as well as social and emotional learning in some cases. Related to this are a subset of parental rights bills that give parents the right to review and object to various curricular programs. Keep in mind that most districts, if not all, already had mechanisms for parents to take a look at books they were adopting. Now we're seeing in a number of areas of the country, parents marching into school boards and having fiery debates with school board members about individual words and phrases, et cetera. In terms of how big this trend is, basically since January 1, 2021 until the middle of this summer, there were 392 bills introduced in the states to address these issues. 19 states passed those bills of various types. In some cases, it was just parental rights. In some cases, it was all the buckets I described, et cetera. But 19 states, most of them red, approved these bills. It's 39 bills in 19 states, and that's what we have. So what's the impact on education companies? Frankly, if you're creating content and you're concerned about any of these topics I just mentioned, my advice is to know where you're operating in. What state is this? Do they have such a law? If they do have such a law, consult the State Department of Education to see if they've put out any guidance or an FAQ. In most cases, they have. So there are things that are being done to simply help inform the public and providers about what to do. I've been asked a number of times about whether any of this will go away. I don't see it going away anytime soon because it sells to a certain part of the electorate, let's put it that way, to a certain type of voter. Over time, these laws may be amended or revised. I frankly don't see many more states adding these. It really, if you look at a map of where these 19 states are, and you'll see that by and large, they are what is generally considered to be, and I'm not trying to be partisan, but generally considered to be the red states. Speaking of the map, if you really want more information on this, I have it available for my clients. But you can also go to a group called PEN, P-E-N America, which is a free speech group, very well established. I've worked with them in various ways on curriculum projects over the years when I was at the Publishers Association. They've tracked all these bills. They have a map that shows where all these states are and what bills they passed. And they go to a great length in explaining this whole movement. So sorry I went on so long about that, Kevin, but I hope it explains things.
Good. It's when you and I spoke last fall, we were predicting that there would be kind of a it would reach kind of a peak around the election, and it sounds like that did kind of happen. It's probably still sort of frothing about, but it doesn't. It sounds like it's 19 states isn't exactly small and contained, but it is kind of can be predicted where it's happening, and it doesn't seem to be spreading throughout the country.
Right. Yeah. I don't think it's going to grow from here, but it may be again. It certainly could happen. In some cases, in some states, we're seeing the opposite side, seeing a backlash to this, and I won't get into all of that. So,
yeah, and if you missed that, it's PEN America, and Nicole just put it in the chat. It's www.pen.org.
Very good. Let me talk just a few moments about some curriculum bills. Aside from literacy and science and reading and math, we've also seen a little bit of an uptick in some media literacy legislation. I think there's still a bill pending in California, and they better get on with it because that session ends on September 14th. There's a good amount of STEM legislation out there and career tech. There's also some climate change education. A couple of specific things I wanted to mention is Indiana. Indiana had language in several bills this past legislative session calling for high quality curricular materials, and they've established advisory lists. So if you're operating in Indiana, and if you're not aware of this, please go to the Department of Education website and put in HQCM advisory list, high quality curricular materials. And it talks about the steps that need to be taken if you're trying to get districts to adopt certain materials in certain subjects. Now, keep in mind, Indiana no longer has an adoption. It did away with it in May 2013. But now they seem to be dipping their toes back into approval of curriculum. I think if I understand the legislation, I've read it several times, I think by and large, the Indiana Department of Education just wants to make sure that vendors complete roughly about 4 major steps in having their materials reviewed by an outside reviewing group. I think perhaps that report, the legislative language did not say that, but I think that they're looking for that type of review from that organization or another, and then going through some other steps and then self-certifying that you've done that. And maybe a little more than that, but please take a look at it if you're operating in Indiana. Another thing, go ahead.
Just for the audience, we're one of those groups that has done those reviews. So we are currently doing some for customers in Indiana, and expect that as other states come up, we may be third-party reviewers in those areas as well.
Right. Sorry, Kevin, I forgot to mention you. I'm talking too fast. So another thing I wanted to mention in terms of adoptions and curriculum bills, one has to do with California, another has to do with Texas. First, California, which is not on this slide. California finally passed its math framework. Yay! It was held up for quite some time over all sorts of debates about how to teach math. And the big yay is not only that the math adoption will probably go forward either next year or the following year. It's no longer, it should not be delayed any longer. But once that math adoption gets out of the way, it opens the way, we hope, for an ELA adoption, which is way overdue in California. It's been 10 years or more. since the state has had English language arts and ELL adoption. So, California has been a little bit dry, so to speak, on big adoptions recently, but now math, and a year or two after that, ELA.
Yeah.
I also want to mention major changes in Texas. Texas, I put in SB 1605. I think it's HB, House bill instead of Senate bill, but just think of 1605. It's a piece of legislation that has made a lot of significant changes to the state's adoption process, the biggest changes since 2010, which was the last big reforms. I won't even begin to go through all of this. If you're doing business in Texas, I think you may be doing business in Texas, please do the following. Go to the Texas Education Agency website. Go to the pages related to instructional materials and adoptions. And you should see a link to a very good and very long webinar about all of this legislation conducted by the Commissioner of Education himself. It goes through all of the details and takes you through it. But I will say three things about what this does. One, it opens the adoption process open to off-cycle submissions. It used to be that you'd have to wait 6 or 7 years between the call of those subjects to submit. Now there will be just rolling adoptions in many of the subjects. Second thing I want to mention is there is a new system of incentives in Texas for districts. Districts will get more money if they use materials from the state board list. So you got to get on the list, but at the same time, I think the state board or the state is looking to expand the list through these rolling reviews. Last thing I'll mention is open education resources. The Texas Education Agency has now been charged in this legislation with going deeper into production of curriculum, development and production of curriculum, specifically open education resources in ELA and mathematics. In fact, they're hiring, I think, 91 new positions at the state agency to get into this. Having said that, I think everybody expects that there will be opportunities for providers to support the Texas Education Agency in curriculum development, content development, et cetera. In all likelihood, the Texas Education Agency will be letting contracts for that. Goodness, what else do we have, Nicole?
Talk about other state adoptions and instructional materials.
Yeah, indeed. And when I put these up here, frankly, these are the adoption states. There's 18 or 19 states that have adoption regulations and adoption cycles. These do not include the traditional non-adoption states like Ohio, which has not historically done adoptions. There will be new science of reading adoptions coming down the pike rather soon, but they currently are not necessarily scheduled and announced. At any rate, right now in 2023, science is being reviewed and eventually adopted in Florida, Mississippi, Nevada, Oregon, Tennessee, and Texas. Math, Oklahoma, West Virginia, world languages, Idaho, Mississippi. I won't read all of 2024, but these are the opportunities coming up in 2024. If there's a theme to this, it's science and math currently. And from there, who knows where it goes? The world languages is out there as well. What's not on this list is there's a lot of career tech and STEM going on as well. And I think we have one more slide that echoes, let me see, federal topics. Wanted to get to this very quickly. One thing I wanted to mention, which may not affect very many of you, but if you should be cognizant of it. There is now rulemaking at the Department of Justice, their Americans with Disabilities Act office, on accessibility. The Web Content Access Guidelines, the Department of Justice has proposed that all publicly funded governmental entities, such as state agencies, local agencies, and intergovernmental agencies, which are school districts, that they begin using WCAG 2.1 AA. In other words, they get up to speed with the current accessibility guidelines. I think this in particular impacts older companies with a long legacy list of products. You may have clients coming to you and saying, can you put this in this new format for me, et cetera. So it is, I think, to some degree, it has the potential to cause some companies some heartburn. Newer companies, probably not so much. Other federal topics, is Congress doing anything on K-12? Largely what they're doing is funding. Due to the very tight majority in the House where Republicans control by just 5 votes, there's very little disagreement on K-12 issues. I don't expect anything major to pass. You never know, but at the moment, what is Congress doing in terms of K-12 issues? They've passed a few bills. They passed one on parental rights by a very partisan vote, and a few other cultural wars issues, again, on very close votes, but nothing significant. Now, there is supposed to be some oversight hearings. Republicans have asked for oversight hearings on whether ESSER funding is working, whether it's helping support our nation's students. And then there's a variety of hearings that are being held on student aid, post-secondary student aid, et cetera. The last two I really tackled early on, ESSER spending status and the federal budget. So goodness, next slide, Nicole. I did want to mention something that those of us who are very close to the market, as I'm sure many of you are seeing, there is an influx of international companies that are looking for opportunities due to the what has been the wealth of funding here. Oftentimes they're looking for partnerships with American companies as well. Expansion opportunities in the US market due to science of reading and a good adoption calendar. And then obviously, well, actually, Kevin, do you want to pick it up from here and mention?
Sure. I mean, really what we're starting to see two things, right? A lot of overseas companies coming into the US, and then sort of the vice versa. US companies going overseas, or overseas entities, particularly in the Middle East and in Asia, looking for US or UK curriculum in their English language programs. And for anyone who knows Westchester, it won't surprise you, we're kind of in the heart of that. We've got clients that we're helping in either direction, either helping them move into the US market because we know the standards and such well, and then advising them on other groups they can work with, folks like Jay, to get an understanding of the policy landscape. And then also helping U.S. publishers and ed techs localize their content for the international markets, both again in the U.S. and the U.K. Yeah. Okay, Nicole, we have a number of questions, and we have, I think, about 15 minutes or a little more than that. Summary. I'm sorry. Oh, no, go ahead, Jay. Why don't you summarize, and then I've got a big list of questions for you.
Yeah, well, I jumped the gun on this slide, and it's more or less what you all have heard about over the past 40 minutes anyway. Strong support for science of reading and science and math is emerging. Culture wars legislation poses difficulties for vendors and content curriculum, but not impossible if you do your research. State K-12 funding remains positive. Federal funding will, for the most part, remain positive or around flat, but keep in mind a lot of ESSER funding available. And then again, don't look for Congress to have a whole lot of impact on K-12 policy issues in this year or next. So, Kevin.
All right, question around funding. Somebody asked, what's the expected outlook for Perkins funding after 2024?
Yeah, it's well, it falls into that bucket of one of those federal programs. I mentioned the Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV, but there are other federal programs such as the Perkins Career Tech Funding. It too has seen really good funding over the past couple of years, and I frankly see Perkins as probably between flat and up 1 or 2%. Now, you never know. When I say this, the Department of Education could take the money, the big bucket of money it gets from Congress, and it could say, well, we're going to lower this title by 5%, and we're going to give another program a 4% increase. So they can adjust these allocations. It's my guess that the Biden administration will largely just kind of give it across the board. So again, the funding allocations are slowing, but it's not a disaster.
Okay. Good. Couple people have asked whether this is going to be recorded. Yes, and the links will be in the materials we send it out. And Nicole just posted a link to one of our blog posts on the science of reading, which is really fitting because I got a whole list of science of reading questions here. Jay, I think you answered this at least in relationship to Ohio. But somebody asked, will new state programs related to science of reading for instructional materials be generally winner take all? As a result of a single vendor chosen at the state level, or are they more likely to be like typical state adoptions where it's kind of an approved list that folks can choose from?
Yeah, very good question. It's one that I have to field nearly every day as I work with clients. It really depends on the state, and the fact is we don't know. For example, Colorado, which has a large science of reading initiative passed several years ago, and it had a recommended list, a so-called adoption list, and it's a long one. They also even have a supplemental list, which is really good. So they give educators a lot to choose from, and they give vendors a lot of opportunities. But we have seen some states have very short lists where it may not be a winner takes all, but it may be 3 or 4 winners taking all. And yeah, it's not necessarily good development. We shall see. The other related thing is, unlike the established adoption states, those 8 or 19 that I mentioned, these new states are states that have new science of reading. Many of them have not done adoptions before. They don't have the regulations and the disclosure requirements, et cetera, the timelines that we see in places like Texas, Florida, Tennessee, et cetera, the various adoption states. So this gets to be kind of problematic to navigate if you are a provider looking at opportunities. You're going to have to spend a lot of time going state by state, which again is something I'm doing a lot of, trying to prepare for these opportunities. So very good question. I hope that helps.
Yeah, no, that's good. Couple of other ones related to science of reading here. How has the science of reading and structured literacy changed state and federal funding for districts and schools?
Yeah, how has it changed? It's a good question. Well, if nothing else, we've seen a very strong uptick, I should say, in funding for science reading, and I mentioned some of those allocations. Now, whether it's actually, and this is not said in the question, but I'm inferring it, is money is actually being taken, moved, shifted to science of reading. I haven't seen that yet. Most of these science of reading initiatives have been funded with new monies or special allocations from the states, particularly over the past several years. Whether they're actually taking things away from established ELA funding in districts, it could very well be happening, particularly at the K-3 level. I don't necessarily have any proof. Part of the issue is getting into this. We can kind of find that out if a state mandates it. But if it's just the district practice, there's roughly 13,800 public school districts in this country, and all of them are doing things differently. So it gets to be very granular.
Yeah. Well, speaking of what districts are doing, somebody asked, between funding uncertainties and science of reading legislation and trends, how might this impact decisions on supplemental ELA curriculum? Is there a hesitation to make a purchase or an opportunity to make a change? And then someone also relatedly asked, for folks who have recently purchased approved ELA materials, will they be reimbursed for their purchases?
Yeah, the first question, goodness, it really just it depends on how the state legislation and regulations shapes the Science of Reading initiative in the state, and to what extent that it gives opportunities to all sorts of publishers, so-called core and supplemental. For example, I mentioned a moment ago the Colorado list, which there's a lot of opportunities there, but again, states may go looking for just several vendors, for example. So this really is a state-by-state issue, and companies are going to need to do their research and analysis and take a look at what's available. Kevin, the second part of your question, part of it was
excuse me, it was, will districts that recently purchased approved ELA programs be reimbursed for those purchases?
If they're purchased, you certainly should be. I always assume that there is a contract that has been put in place between the vendor and the district. So, and in most cases, the district is the purchasing agent. Most schools really don't have that great a degree of purchasing power. So there certainly should be contractual arrangements to get paid, whether it's 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, or whatever.
Yeah. Somebody just asked, you mentioned Colorado. Are there other states that are looking at supplemental instructional material adoptions?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there are quite a few. I mean, we went through the adoptions and I listed some of these. I am building a list of everything that we currently know about what these states are doing in Science of Reading. At the moment, it's being updated. I've had the list for quite some time, but it's being updated with the current material. And again, it's a matter of going state by state and looking for the information, and in some cases, interviewing various state directors of literacy, et cetera, looking at the legislation, et cetera. So it's kind of a painstaking thing that myself and others are doing just to get this figured out. Keep in mind that the adoption market, the one that Kevin and I showed you with the other subjects, that market has existed. It literally goes back to the 1920s and is a very well-established market. It has matured and changed over the years. But those 18 or 19 states, which used to number about 25, but officially it's more like 18 or 19, they have very well-established adoption programs and procurement. Their business officers are engaged in all of this as well. So we're going to see, a big change here with Science of Reading and some other subjects over the next several years. Because adding all this up, nearly everything I've said, there's just a great deal of new types of controls being put in place. And I'm not saying all of them are bad. Some of them are very good. But some of them just need to be fleshed out, and it's going to take a while to do.
Well, that anticipates one of the other questions here. How do you support literacy holistically and across ECE and secondary ed without overstepping any state mandated training or curriculum from the state on Science of Reading, from a policy to practice level implementation?
Yeah, well, guess what? Every state's doing this training in some different ways. Some are mandating that teachers get trained and then kind of turning to the post-secondary sector in the state to do that. Others are wanting to have their own very extensive professional development programs. Some will be letting contracts. So it's a very good question, but it falls into the bucket of it remains to be seen how all of this happens. Keep in mind that a lot of the state legislation is very broad, and they let the Department of Education and the State Board of Education establish regulations. Some of these Science of Reading bills that have been passed say nothing more than teachers will receive professional development. And then guess what? If it was passed and signed into law toward the end of June, which a lot of these were, it's now going to take the State Department of Education several months to figure out how to implement the legislation. So it's going to be a very busy year, put it that way, for all of us.
Really just, you know, I mean, Josh, this is not a small task, but, you know, being where the big states are selling in and then looking at what their state board of eds are doing and their education departments and sort of figure that out. But some of that may not be available yet because the states themselves are still figuring this out.
Yeah, I mean, quite frankly, if I were selling into this sort of science and reading market, I would get that list of states that have initiatives and that recently enacted initiatives, which I have on one slide. Have somebody, whether it's a employee or outside analyst, keep tabs on those states on a very regular basis to see what has been issued, what has been posted. In some cases, it's pretty easy to find. In other cases, it's a real pain in the neck. The analyst may find himself or herself reading state board minutes, which are published 60 days or 90 days after a state board meeting. You know, it really varies state by state. So yeah, sorry to provide so much news and then say, well, we really don't know about some of this, but all of this is very recent and will be unfolding here over the next year.
Well, and it really speaks to the localized nature of education in this country.
Yeah, indeed.
Switching gears, one person asked, what are strategies around managing concerns with DEI legislation, particularly if DEI mindset is at the heart of how they develop the curriculum and manage their company?
Yeah, it's I guess to me it falls back into the answer I had previously about finding out what states have passed such concepts that may make reference to divisive concepts and, frankly, in some cases, DEI, which I don't find to be divisive, but legislators in those states do. So be aware of what states you're operating in. Look at those FAQs and guidance from the state boards of education to see if they might be helpful. You may find yourself wanting to operate in other states, even though you may be missing big opportunities, for example, in Florida. But I'll tell you that in my 35 years of education policy, a lot of it dealing with publishing, I've seen publishers walk away from certain states because they didn't want to deal with certain concepts. And I won't go into what those are. Well, I will say it may be evolution. It may have to do with the history of the United States, certain periods of history, etc. But it just means being nimble and navigating those states. One final aspect of all this: in some states that have not passed these culture war bills, there's still individual districts that might be. It doesn't always take a state to pass a bill. For example, I live in Maryland and also Delaware. I've seen both states. Both states are blue states, so to speak. But in both cases, there have been school districts that have had protests by parents, et cetera. I don't think these districts that I'm thinking of will bend to those protests, but it's out there. So you just have to be nimble and navigate it.
Yeah. One last question, and then there are a good number of questions we didn't get to, so we'll follow up with the webinar link, and we'll try to address some of the other questions that were on the list. But you cannot have a webinar talking about policy or education right now without asking about AI. So what are you tracking on AI? What are you hearing and seeing as it relates to policy around AI in education?
Yeah, interesting you say that. There has been some bills about ChatGPT and I don't whatever it's called. I think some legislatures in some states got very concerned, like, oh my gosh, what is this? Now, some of that legislation had more to do with the ability of certain AI apps and platforms, so to speak, to support cheating at the college level, but also at the K-12 level. There's been some of that. What I've seen more than anything with K-12, with AI, I haven't seen a lot of mandates or firmly written bills. I've seen more of, oh, let's have a study or let's have a commission in the state, which usually says that legislators really don't know much about the topic. And how are we going to handle it? How is this going to impact us? So there really hasn't been a real onslaught of AI legislation at the K-12 level, but it's in all likelihood on the horizon. Now, one thing that is, I think, fairly helpful, the Department of Education earlier this year in the spring put out a booklet on artificial intelligence in education, which I think I've sent to a number of clients, and I think they found it to be somewhat helpful or very helpful in some cases. So I look for the Department of Education to try to provide more guidance to the states on what to do with this.
Very good. And I know Nicole's going to wrap up here in a second. I will put in a plug for the EdTech Insiders podcast. That's a space that I follow pretty closely, not so much around policy, but more around just how the industry is thinking about EdTech. They've had some great conversations on there. We can pop that link in the slide too, but that's a great resource for just what seems to be some of the cutting edge thinking around AI in education. So thank you, Jay. I'm going to turn it over to Nicole. Always appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
We'll be back here in several months with we'll find out whether your predictions were right and updates of what else is going on.
Thank you, Kevin and Nicole. I really appreciate it. Take care.
Take care.
Thank you to Kevin and Jay, and thank you to all of you for participating in today's session, which we hope you found very informative. As Kevin alluded, within the next several days, we will be sending out a link to the webinar video, as well as the presentation, Q&A, and the links that were touched on during the discussion. So please be on the lookout for that. And of course, if you have any questions related to any of that content, we encourage you to please reach out and connect with us either through the email that's on the screen right now, or you can meet with us. We will be at several conferences over the next 6 to 8 weeks, including the EdExec Summit, EdTech Week, and the EdWeek Market Brief Summit that'll be at the end of October. So we're here to help our clients and colleagues in the industry and help you with your product development solutions and challenges. So do reach out to us with any comments, questions, or concerns. So with that, I will ask if you can please take the survey that will come up on your screen as we exit out of the webinar. This helps us ensure that we're giving you useful information now and going forward. So it's 5 questions and should take you less than 2 minutes to complete, and it really provides a lot of insights for us. So thank you once again for joining us today, and we hope you enjoy the upcoming holiday weekend. Thank you.